Okay, I think the next logical step that we want to take is we want to cover some of this conditional logic that you saw a little bit of a sample of in the last video, and I'll just go ahead and make some changes here. The things that I want to cover in this video, I just want to make sure that we don't lose. So I'll put some comments here at the top of this script just to make sure that we cover everything. So here's what we want to cover when we're talking about flow control. So you'll get a bit of a hint by these comments. We want to cover the if statement, and then obviously we want to cover the else statement. And there's the else if statement. We want to cover, these things as well as their format and structure, right? So those are the things we want to cover. We also want to cover some of the logical operators that go in the conditional statements that you're going to be looking at and evaluating. So we'd want to look at the double equal operator, but we'd also want to see the double ampersand, and we want to see the double pipes. It stands for and or. Alright, these are the things that we're going to start with. So let's go ahead and begin. We'll type out some sample code, and I'll kind of explain what it is that's happening as we move along. So if first to give you some basics on flow control and evaluating conditional logic, this is pretty key, which is why we want to make sure that we cover it at the fundamental levels. As you're writing your script, as your programs become a little bit more complex, it's things like flow control and evaluating this if-else logic that is ultimately going to kind of help shape and form your application. Obviously, you take different directions based on things like user input or other circumstances or conditions in your application. So you do need to know how to do this. Let me show you what the basic syntax of this is. So we start with the if statement. We open up some parentheses. And in the parentheses is the condition that we're evaluating. Now, the condition is always going to evaluate to a Boolean, meaning true or false. So we'll set a couple of things up here. We'll initialize some variables just to get this started, and we'll go with our favorite standby, which is number. We'll set number to an integer value of 5. And what we'll do is we'll include our conditional statement that says if number is greater than 3. Right? Then we'll open and close our curly braces, and it's in these curly braces where we would actually perform the series of expressions that we want to evaluate excuse me, in the event that the condition that we're evaluating here is true. So we would say, for example, echo your number is greater than 3. So in a case like this, if everything evaluates the way that we're expecting, we say if number is greater than 3, then we should expect to see echoed to our screen, your number is greater than 3. And if the number is not greater than 3, we should actually expect to see nothing, because we haven't accounted for anything other than this. So we'll go to our browser, we'll check and see what happens. And it says our number is greater than 3. Now, to test this, to make sure that this is working right, we'll reset the value of number. We'll set it to 2. 2 is clearly not greater than 3. When we save that and we try to run it again, we should get nothing, which is exactly what we get. So in a case like this, you can expand your conditional statements, and you'll include an else. Your else in this particular case is going to be your catch-all. That means it's if anything other than number being greater than 3 is true, the else gets triggered. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll say your number is not greater than 3. Right? So we've set number equal to 2. We're evaluating if number is greater than 3, let us know. Else, let us know that it's not greater than 3. In this case, number is equal to 2. So what we would expect to see when we look at our screen is that your number is not greater than 3. So that's the if statement. The else statement is your catch-all. Now, to expand on this, we'll start looking at the else if statement instead. And when you're using an else if, it's going to follow your if, and it's going to include an additional expression to evaluate. So we'll say if number is greater than 500. Right? We'll change what we're echoing here because this is obviously not accurate anymore. And we'll say your number is greater than 500. So, in this case, we're saying number is equal to 2. If number is greater than 3, let us know that it's greater than 3. Else if number is greater than 500, let us know that the number is greater than 500. But we've removed the else, which means there is no longer a catch-all. That means if this is not true and this is not true, it's going to do nothing. In this case, number is equal to 2. We should not expect to see anything on our screen. And we don't. But if we change this to 4, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to evaluate if number is greater than 3. In this case, it is. We should expect to see that your number is greater than 3 here. When we go to our browser and look, that's what we get. Now we'll change it again to 101. Now watch what happens. I'm sorry, let's do this. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. We'll say 501, right? 501 is greater than 500. So let's see what happens. Well, interestingly, when I refresh my screen, it says that my number is greater than 3. Why is that? Well, because 501 is, in fact, greater than 3. So, obviously what you're trying to shoot for in this particular test is you're trying to trigger this number is greater than 500. But when you're using these compound if statements, when you're actually leveraging ELSEIF, what happens is it evaluates from the top to bottom, meaning once it comes across one of these conditions that's actually true, it executes what it needs to execute within that code block. So the code expressions within those curly braces, and then it escapes the entire rest of the statement. So all the way to the last curly brace, it's done. And then it begins to work, from there and on. So let me put that back. So in this particular case, since 501 is in fact greater than 3, it ran this echo expression here, and then it jumped all the way out of the conditional block, and that was it. So that's why we didn't actually see this happen. What we can do is if we say if number is less than 3, we can change it to less than 3. Else if your number is greater than 500. So in this particular case, when number is set to 501, it's not going to be less than 3. So it's going to skip over this one. It's going to come across this one. It's going to see that it's actually true, and it should, in fact, tell us that on the screen, which is what it does. So something good to remember, it's going to start from the top. It's going to go all the way down. The first time it comes across something that's true, it'll run those expressions in those curly braces, and then it jumps all the way out of that if-else block, and then it continues to process code from there. So something to keep in mind. Of course, you have an option to put in your catch-all, where we can say, I'm not sure. Let's talk about some of your logical operators, because we've covered this, and I think you have a pretty good handle on the format and structure of these else if statements. So let's go ahead and initialize something. We'll initialize a number. We'll set that over to 10. And then we'll do another if statement here. Okay, and we'll say if number, and we'll say equals 5. And we'll echo, and we'll say this is equal to 5. So if you take a look at the expression here, number equal 5, I'm using the double equals. And what that means is we're actually asking the PHP interpreter to evaluate whether or not number actually does equal the value of 5. And the reason that we use these double equals is to differentiate between what we're doing up here on line 5, which is setting the variable to 10, and then what we're doing down here on line 7, which is actually evaluating its value and checking to see if it's 5. So if we were to actually make this a single equal, what we're doing here is in the parentheses, we're actually setting number equal to 5, which is not what we want to do. we want PHP to look at it and say, does number actually equal 5? And if it does, return a true, otherwise return a false. So it's important to note that when you're actually checking for equality in an if statement like this, you want to use the double equal, not the single equal. The single equal is for setting the value. The double is for evaluating its value. So we'll include an else statement here, and we'll say, nope, not equal to 5. So if we're setting number to 10, we're evaluating whether or not it's equal to 5, we should expect to see that it's going to tell us that no, 10 in fact is not equal to 5. And when we refresh our screen, that's what it does. So again, important to note, the double equal, that's for evaluating its value. Well, the single is for setting its value, so that's important. So we'll look at the ampersand and the or operators as well. Your conditional logic can get a little bit more complex. It's not always going to be as straightforward as you've seen in these examples. So we can say if number is greater than 9, we'll use the double ampersand. I'll explain what that means. And number is less than 11. We'll say, yeah, looks good. But we'll include an else that says, sorry, not so good. So here's what we're doing here. We're in this if statement, we're saying if number is greater than 9, we have the double ampersand, which means and, number is less than 11. So what we're doing is we're saying evaluate both of these expressions, and if both of them are true, then we want to proceed. The double ampersand is similar to the double equal in that you're working with conditional logic here. So you're not concatenating anything, you're not bringing anything together like that. The double ampersand has a very specific purpose, which means include this expression along with this expression, with determining whether or not this condition is wholly true to evaluate what comes next in these curly braces. Else, do the fallback. So let's take a look. We've set number equal to 10, and we're saying if number is greater than 9 and number is less than 11, then it should look good. We'll save it. We'll go look at our screen, and I think we already know, yeah, it looks good. But because both of these have to be true, when we go and change number to 12, when we say if number is greater than 9 and number is less than 11, we shouldn't expect to see that, yeah, it looks good. Because number is 12. That means only one of these is true. Number being greater than 9. That is true because it's 12, but it's not less than 11. So the double ampersand means look at both of these, make sure they're both true. And if they are, go ahead and proceed. In this particular case, they're not. So we should expect that it's going to say, nope, sorry, that's just not happening. That's where the or comes in. The double pipes here, if we were to replace these two ampersands with two pipes, now what we're saying is something totally different. We're saying if number is greater than 9 or number is less than 11, then say, yeah, sure, looks good to me. Otherwise, nope. Nope, not so good. So let's look at this. Number is equal to 12. Is that greater than 9? It is. Is it less than 11? No. But because we're using the or operator here in our expression, only one of these has to be true. And if that's the case, it should be okay. We'll save that, we'll go back and we'll look. And sure enough, it looks good. So flow control it's pretty straightforward when you really kind of look at it that way. This is probably the briefest example of flow control that you've ever seen and will ever see in a tutorial of this type. There's plenty to look at. I'll go ahead and I'll include some additional notes here in the video description, but I think what we're going to actually cover next is conditional logic and looping. That actually can be pretty complex, But this can get a little bit more complex, and there's other things to look at like switch statements, and I'll cover those in a future video. But I think you probably get the basics here.